everyone, and thank you for joining us for the session 2 of our roundtable discussion on sustainable agriculture. Where are we headed after 2020? Over the last few weeks, we have had close to 1,200 registrations from more than 250 organizations across 62 countries. Given the phenomenal interest in this virtual event, it is truly my pleasure to host this session today. My name is 𝐤𝐚𝐻, and I'm the head of marketing at 𝐸𝐻𝐻. I've been with 𝐸𝐻𝐻 for a little over 2 years now, and I have enjoyed every moment of my contribution to the agri-tech space. I believe most of you already know 𝐸𝐻𝐻 either with an engagement with us or through our social media presence. However, for those of you who do not know, I'll take a couple of minutes to give you a brief introduction. 𝐸𝐻𝐻 is a leading B2B AI and data-led agri-tech organization that provides software as a service solutions to agri enterprises globally. Our customers leverage our unique suite of technology solutions to effectively drive their strategies around digitization, traceability, predictability, and sustainability. With the vision to maximize per acre value and the mission to make every farm traceable, 𝐸𝐻𝐻 has digitized over 6.1 million acres of farmland, benefiting 2.1 million farmers on its platform, while managing 388 crops and 9,400 crop varieties in 52 countries on 6 continents. 𝐸𝐻𝐻 reimagines the world of agriculture with data. And today, we at 𝐸𝐻𝐻 are absolutely delighted to host all of you. With that, I would like to thank you all for joining us and welcome the moderator for the session, Mr. 𝐸𝐚𝐻𝐻 Mathur. I must say that 𝐸𝐸𝐻𝐻 is no less a celebrity in the agri space and is known to moderate many agri events and forums in India and globally. 𝐸𝐸𝐻𝐻 is a venture capitalist with profession with over 25 years of experience in investment banking, management consulting, policy development, private equity, venture capital, and early stage investing in sectors pertaining to agriculture and food, among others. With that, I would like to welcome 𝐸𝐸𝐻𝐻. Thank you all for joining again. Over to you, 𝐸𝐸𝐻𝐻, now.
Thanks very much, Jyoti, for a nice introduction. Hello to everyone. Welcome you all to the webinar on sustainable agriculture. Where are we headed after 2020? So let me set the context before we get into the panel discussion. As most of us would know that there are about 500 million smallholder farmers in the world who have the land ownership of less than 2 hectares. They are the source of livelihood for as many as 2 billion people, which is approximately 30% of the world's population. However, the fact is that this section of the society continues to be the most vulnerable set of the population because of lack of access to markets, access to institutional credit, high cost of capital, and exposure to multitude of climate risk. I think we would all agree that we cannot make agriculture inclusive, sustainable, and remunerative without solving the problems of smallholder farmers. Another important dimension is gender equality. Again, as most of us would know, that more and more agricultural and allied activities, in particular horticulture and animal husbandry, are being done by the women in the farming household, right? So I think these are key discussion points today for today's discussion. And what we want to bring in today's webinar is the role of agri-tech, agri-technology, and new age innovation, how it can solve for the problems of smallholder farmers, essentially by improving their farm economics. We are going to discuss the role of innovations in making agriculture market-driven, sustainable, and gender equal. And I'm extremely fortunate to have a very highly experienced and knowledgeable set of people on the panel from across the world. Before we get into the discussion, let me introduce them one by one. We'll begin with Ellen Johnson. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, hello. Good to be here.
Yeah, Ellen is the program lead for smallholder supply chain at IFC. He joins us today. He has over 20 years of professional experience, and he has been working with smallholder farmers across Africa to improve their productivity and business professionalism and link them to commercial supply chain of IFC agribusiness clients. His area of expertise is farmer productivity, smallholder supply chain, and improving the financial literacy of agribusiness SMEs. Welcome, Alan, to the panel. Next one is Leesa Shrader. Leesa is the director of Mercy-Corp's AgriFin programming, supported by the Gates and MasterCard Foundation. She's based in Kenya and reaching Tanzania, Ethiopia, Zambia, and Nigeria. AgriFin supports more than 100 partners to design, test, and scale digitally enabled services for smallholder farmers. And now they're reaching to more than 5 million farmers across Africa. Leesa's expertise is in agriculture finance, wholesale and retail microbanking, market research, and product development. Leesa, welcome you to the panel. We go to the next panelist, Lucy Pachoki. Lucy is the CEO of Pan-African Agribusiness Consortium. She comes with close to 20 years of experience, and as a member of several advisory councils and steering committees, she advocates for the inclusion and leadership of the domestic private sector as the drivers of agricultural development in Africa. Lucy's interest and expertise is in food security, supporting the youth through mentorship, agribusiness strategy for Africa. Lucy, welcome you to the panel.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Great. We move to the next panelist, Joe Bolyar. He is the Senior Director of Sustainable Supply Chain Programs at Tanagar. He has over 15 years of experience implementing developmental projects around the world. He works very closely with private sector companies to develop sustainable sourcing projects that improve farmers' productivity, lower the cost of production, and improve household incomes. His area of expertise is farmer productivity and smallholder supply chain management. Joe, welcome to the panel.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Great, Joe. You're looking good. I know it's early morning in Washington. Thanks very much for joining at odd hours. Okay, we go to the next panelist, a colleague from Cropin, Akash Parekh. He's the Vice President for Sales in Europe and Asia at Cropin. He has a background in business, technology, and agriculture across the EU market and Asia Pacific regions. Having worked with smallholder farmers directly in rural India and Fiji in the past, he now heads Cropin's international markets. He also has a first-hand understanding of complexities in the food supply chain in developing countries. His area of interest is tailoring technology to context, supply chains in developing countries. So that's a panel for the day. All the panelists, thank you very much for joining us today. We have put together a very interesting set of questions for each one of you, which I hope will give a lot of interesting views for the discussion today. So without further ado, I would like to dive right in and initiate the conversation. So let me begin with Alan. Alan, the question for you is, smallholder farmers are essential to the well-being of farming worldwide. How can we make this ecosystem more inclusive and support a sustainable supply chain in the near future? Over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Hemendra. Well, I work for IFC, and for us, smallholders are a critical part of the supply chains of many of our clients, particularly in Africa and South Asia. We provide both investment and advisory services for our clients, and reflecting on our implementation experience, I think that, well, we have pulled out 3 main success factors for building, and I think in your question, Hemendra, there was an inclusive and sustainable supply chain. So the first one of these is there really needs to be solid market demand for the commodity in question. And typically in one of our projects, it's actually our client who's a buyer or a processor of the commodity. But if you don't have this engine, driving the value chain, then you can run into trouble. So effective market demand is number one. Secondly, for the sustainability question, we don't just, although we're focused on smallholders, we have to look at the whole supply chain, and every player in the chain needs to be getting a decent return. Otherwise, the chain will not function. The third success factor for us is this whole issue of the transition of smallholder farmers. It's a mindset change from semi-subsistence to this farming as a business mentality. And to do that, we need to build their professionalism. And for us, there's two aspects to this. One is just the straight agronomic skills, farming, raising productivity. So that's one part. But the other part, which is often neglected, is the business management skills that they need. So reflecting on the kind of theme of this webinar, and thanks to CropIn and everyone for inviting me, we want to look beyond 2020. And for me, at least, agtech and digital tools are really going to be an essential, they're going to be playing a key role in enabling all of those three success factors that I just identified. And specifically, what we can see is the dramatic changes that digital tools can bring in terms of reducing transaction costs in the supply chain, and actually right across the supply chain, not just at the farming end. I think digital tools enable much smarter targeting of farmer needs. And then lastly, I think there's an empowerment factor where digital tools enable much better farm level decision making by making tools and information that wasn't available is now kind of potentially at your fingertips, literally. With the crisis that's unfolded around us, the COVID, we have seen that there's a kind of strange catalytic effect here, that it's actually, for many of our clients and our supply chains, it's actually accelerated the moves towards digitization, both of transactions and information flows, because people really need to keep food, coming into cities and so on, but they also need to observe social distancing. And I think people recognize that digitization definitely has a role to play there. Having said all that, one of the challenges of digitization is the skills and the capacity, the digital skills. And I think that whilst there's huge positive potential, there's also a risk that we may have a digital divide phenomena, as the gulf between those who can use the tools and those who cannot becomes bigger. So Hemendra, I'll leave it there. I'm conscious we have to be brief and concise today.
Thank you, and you stay with us. I'll call upon Leesa next. Leesa, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Leesa.
Sorry, I'm managing across two devices, so just want to get them both going. Sorry about that. Hi. Okay.
No problem, Leesa. No hurry. Great. So I think Ellen made very interesting points on digital divide, reducing the transaction costs for smallholder farmers. I think they are very, very powerful insights coming from Ellen. Leesa, my question to you is, again, with respect to smallholder farmers, what can we envision for the smallholder farmers to increase their productivity, incomes, and resilience to mitigate risks? And how can we ensure gender parity while doing so?
Thank you. Thanks very much, Hemendra. Would you mind moving to the next slide so I can just kind of speak to the slide I had prepared?
Sure.
Thanks. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel with this great group of panelists, and also with CropIn. Mercy Corps' AgriFin programming has been running out of Kenya for about 5 years, funded by the MasterCard Foundation and the Gates Foundation. And basically what we're meant to be doing is working alongside of technology innovators to build digitally enabled services for smallholder farmers, really to help them do exactly what this session had set forth, help them to build productivity, help them to build their incomes, and help them to build resilience The hypothesis behind the whole program is that technology can significantly reduce the costs of reaching smallholder farmers and also create an incredible platform where all kinds of services can be streamed to farmers. So over the last 5 years, we've worked with more than 100 partners, banks, mobile network operators, agricultural companies, young tech startups, you name it, government, across our 5 countries. And I think what we're seeing right now is, huge momentum. There's been a huge change since we started this program 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So we're beginning to see a real convergence of actors, whereas I think what you had 5 years ago was, a lot of smaller players trying, maybe reaching 5,000, 10,000 farmers. Now what you're seeing are the convergence of very strong platforms and the beginning of really sharing data and sharing bundles of products and services, so that a lot of our partners now are reaching well over 1 million farmers. One of our partners is CropIn. We've been working with CropIn for the last year and seen what amazing value different kinds of technology innovators like CropIn can provide to banks wanting to get into this space, mobile network operators. So with this convergence of actors, you're beginning to see greater engagement of financial institutions because now they have more visibility on what's happening with smallholder farmers, where they are through geotagging, what they're doing, and I'm, as you can see from my background, I'm mainly my background's mainly in financial services for the poor and for farmers. So what we're seeing is a wide range of data-enabled credit products. Every type of data that's out there right now is needed: behavioral data, credit history, satellite data. And we're seeing credit for not just inputs, but also for labor, for mechanization, for farmers to be able to get to markets. So we're seeing some movement there. It's still early days, but it looks very good. And we're also seeing, the beginning of really strong supply chain management solutions that are, helping to, make it much more realistic for farmers to be able to engage, increase productivity, and really hit markets on the other side. I appreciated what Alan said. If everybody on the supply chain is not making money, this won't work. But the digital systems allow us to manage each piece of the chain. We're also seeing a lot of great smart farming solutions hit the market now, including weather, geotagging, precision agriculture. To help farmers, learn what grows best on their land. From our perspective, crop insurance has been growing phenomenally over the last 2 years, really aided by digital tools. Can reach farmers in the middle of, conflict zones in northern Nigeria, in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And with that resilience piece built in, a lot of other important services can hit the road, and buyers can feel more protected. And then another one that we see is definitely, the effect of climate change, smart farming tools, all kinds of tools helping with climate change. And then a lot of really interesting tech on digital ordering. And that leads to the ability to order a tractor or order your inputs online and get a better deal. So we're seeing, in short, the flowering, I think, the beginning of a real digital marketplace for farmers, where not just farmers, but all kinds of providers of services, whether that's soil testing or post-harvest loss bags, whatever, can be brought together in transparent, supported, data-driven marketplaces. So I think the second question that you had for me, I know we have a short time, is around gender parity. So our program strives to see that in everything that we do, that 50% of the farmers who are reached are women. Sometimes we exceed that target, sometimes we don't, but we've learned a lot of lessons along the way. And I think that, again, to Alan's point, there are real risks around exclusion related to technology. As you can see in the slide, women are a lot less, are 40% less likely to have access to the internet and 23% less likely to own a mobile phone. So as we're building these services, we draw quite a bit. One of the advantages of the facility in working with partners is that we can experiment across what works for women. So things that we've learned is that women face a lot of entry, barriers to entry to markets. They they face a lot of barriers of around their mobility. And in these ways, a cell phone, smartphone, all of these different tools can be a way to really drive inclusion. But trust levels, access levels are important. We've learned for sure that that ID, land ownership, all of these things are barriers to access. And a digital ID and digital credit scoring, these kinds of things can put women back on the market, on the map. And the market for services like like credit and insurance. So I think that again, just to close, as Alan said, I think the COVID-19 and for us the desert locust crisis is really showing as field-based work with farmers is brought almost to a halt. Reliance on digital data has opened the door for a lot of organizations to still be able to continue serving smallholder farmers and work with them. The organizations that we've seen that are using digital data and leveraging partnerships and product bundling are reaching a lot of farmers right now. So it's a really interesting inflection point for technology, and we have a lot of real opportunity that we can pursue now.
Thanks very much, Leesa. I think you raised a very important point on the role of platforms in building first mile and last mile access to millions of farmers. Of course, CropIn has demonstrated it across multiple geographies. I myself have been advocating for Agri-Stack in India to build a platform of sorts which can give access to financial institutions, insurance companies, agri-input, agri-output companies to reach out to farmers. And I think very important point that you mentioned around the role of alternate data in building interesting credit scoring models for farmers. So I'll go to Lucy. So here's the question, Lucy. Can effective private-public sector partnership promote inclusive and sustainable growth of farming communities? And will the role of agri-technology prevail? What steps must one take to enable a future-ready ecosystem? That's a question to you, Lucy. We look forward to your response.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Once again, greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you, CropIn, for organizing this important session. It is very timely, and indeed, we appreciate the work that you're doing as CropIn, especially in Africa. This is the way forward. We need technology and digitalization. It is key right now in transforming our agricultural sector. Let me start by saying that indeed, Africa is on its path of growth. Its time is now. We have so much ongoing, and we remain very, very hopeful and sure that we are getting to where we're supposed to be, and there's great hope. Africa is a continent in the move, and we know that we shall make it, and we remain very, very, very optimistic about it. When I come back to my question, can effective private-public sector partnerships promote inclusive and sustainable growth of farming communities? First and foremost, it's very important to note that our African agriculture is composed of majority the small scaleholder farmers. More than 75% of our farming is the small holding. And it is very important to note that they're scattered everywhere in the country, and at times it's not very easy to get them together. It needs a lot of work, mobilizing them, organizing them, and ensuring that they are in their right value chain, and there is some work that needs to be done around that. And I want to compliment the work that our previous speakers have talked about, that yes, they're working a lot in supporting our smallholder farmers who, I emphasize again, require a lot of support to align themselves into value chains development. And one thing I want to mention here is that the private sector employs more than 90%, and they cannot work alone. They need a conducive environment. And this conducive environment can only be led by the public sector. So for transformation to take place, we need to ensure that the public sector and the private sector work together. The public sector has a role to play in the sense that without giving this environment that is required, the private sector then is not able to deliver in supporting our smallholding farmers. I know that we need the smallholding farmers for production, and as I mentioned earlier on, they have to be organized around a value chain. So what we need to agree as we develop the PPPs, it's important to agree jointly what need to be done by each party. There need to be a clear monitoring and accountability between the two parties. It's so important to understand what is value for each. As much as the private sector would like to support the smallholder farmers and working in the environment, the conducive environment by the government, the public sector, it's very important to know that in the end of the day, business is business. So the private sector has to make some margins, some profit margins. So everyone in this partnership has something to gain. So I want to reemphasize the need of agreeing from the onset what is there for each partner and how do they all move together. As I mentioned earlier on, our smallholder farmers are scattered everywhere. So for us to manage them, it's so important to adapt the modern technologies like what cropping is providing. It's good to understand their digital, their place where they are located, and using the GPS, understanding what is happening in terms of their production and in terms of the processing and the logistics involved. This is the only way we can be able to ensure that there is good coordination using the technology. So indeed, I need to emphasize here that it's good to have all these working together. And it's of great significance to observe that the key trends in farming practices and structures, particularly in the context of future demand for food and other agricultural products, depends on these three working together. Looking at the roles of the government and the markets in stimulating adoption that can improve sustainability in the farm level is key. It's also very important to identify approaches for stimulating the adoption of these technologies that can improve sustainability at the farm level, which is very key and very important. Indeed, I want to stop there by just re-emphasizing how important it is to continue embracing the PPPs, but ensuring once again that each partner is very clear on their role, at the same time ensuring that we adopt the latest technologies, and that is where Africa is. We need to ensure that for us to monitor our crops, the production, the harvesting, we must indeed use the technology. And I'm really looking forward to seeing who else is working on the same model, but I want to reemphasize again that we are very happy about the work that cropping is doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy, and thanks for highlighting the multi-stakeholder approach, role of public-private partnership for making data accessible to farmers, and not just data, but also a bunch of technologies which these startups are developing. I think that's a very great and a very important point. Great, thanks very much. Joe, can you switch on your video?
Hey, 𝐸𝐭.
Once again, thanks very much. I know it's very early morning for you, so please, so we really privileged that you accommodated us.
If I fall asleep in the middle, just shout into the microphone.
Okay, Joe. So the question for you is, how can we develop sustainable sourcing projects that improve farmer productivity, lower the cost of production, and increase farmer income? It'd be good to hear from you. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. Again, my name is Joe Bolyar. I work with Tanager, and we have a portfolio of different supply chain projects across India with several different clients and commodities. So today I'll be drawing on lessons from those projects to answer the question for today's webinar. So the first is, this might seem intuitive or obvious, but the approach is always going to be different depending on the supply chain. So each supply chain is going to have different challenges depending upon the crop, the community from where it's sourced, the location, the levels of access to different inputs or cash, and what kind of agricultural practices are in place in that area. So it's really important to study and understand each situation, then attempt to try and cut and paste a previous intervention into a new area. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, and organizations sometimes make. The other is really to do the research on the crop, the farmers, the communities, and the supply chain. So for the shipment program in Barabanki, India, which Tanager has partnered with Mars Wrigley Confectionery and Symrise, which is a German flavor and fragrance company, and 𝐸𝐳, was recognized in 2019 at the World Procurement Awards as the category winner for sustainability. Through that project, farmers have increased net incomes from mint oil on average by 250% through a combination of 40% yield increases and 20% decreases in cost of production. So I think what worked for that project was really doing the research beforehand. So when you're designing the supply chain intervention, you're not just looking at doing a baseline, but you've got to understand what are the social capital dynamics in the village, what type of access levels to inputs, how farmers are currently growing their crop, the perceptions of the different stakeholders in the supply chain and how farmers perceive them, living income benchmarking, mint crop research trials, gender and barrier analyses. So really, there's lots and lots of research that needs to be done to design a really effective intervention. So I think the more you really know really supports a better design, which gives you better assumptions to start with. And also, I think it's really important not only to do the research up front, but then also maintain sort of a continuous research element to your projects as you go forward. So when you're learning new things, you can test new ideas that you can then incorporate back into the supply chain. The other is, I think one thing we've generally figured out at Tanager over time is that farmers typically aren't adopting practices that don't either save them time, money, or labor, or if you can equate a practice directly to some type of monetary incentive or yield benefit. So typically at Tanager, our supply chain work involves a fairly heavy extension component. So, if you add gaps that increase any of those variables, really adoption rates are much lower. So in the example of the shipment program, we were able to drastically reduce those cost of productions by decreasing the amounts of fertilizers, the number of irrigations, and then also the amount of planting material farmers were using by incorporating sort of better spacing practices. So we really like to use the cost of production lens in our supply chain projects because to some extent there's some agency around it. So if you've got price for volatility within a specific commodity, by focusing on cost of production, you can sort of be independent of that price volatility and return value to the farmer. I think a really key lesson that's really, everyone's talked about this who's spoken before me, but you really need to test your supply chain assumptions and adapt as you learn. And I think with the COVID-19 epidemic, there's no better example of that than right now. No plan survives enemy contact, right? So it's really important to build the ability to experiment. You can't use escalation bias to keep investing in something that's not working. You can't be proud about what you're doing or ideas you've had in the past. You've got to look for ways to adapt. And I think right now, obviously, it's a great example. It's a big question mark. How are collection centers going to operate, when there's restrictions on movement, when farmers might not necessarily feel it's safe? So, how do you build that trust? How do you totally upend, how you're doing collection practices? So I think it's really important to sort of test those supply chain assumptions as you go and adapt as you learn. I think another important design principle is metrics. I think a lot of times sustainability projects tend to capture too much. And so what happens is you get away from what's important and you start collecting a lot of noise. The reality about data collection, even if you're doing it digitally, it can be really expensive and time consuming, and it saps resources. So I think where possible, be smart about how you do sample sizes. I think a lot of the digital solution stuff work that CropN does can help eliminate or reduce data processing costs. and really stay away from data that's not necessary. So on our Schmidt program, I think we fell a little bit into the beginning of trying to capture too many data points. And over the last year, we've been working with a company based out of India called Gannett Analytics to really sharpen some of our practices around data collection, help us answer really critical questions, about how to understand, like, how is your scale up actually going? So creating milestones that let you know if you're on track or off track. And then I think I'm right about at time. So just one last point. I think for supply chain programs and designing sustainable supply chain, it's important that the benefit cuts both ways. So if an intervention is really valuable in one direction, let's say it really benefits the company, they're able to perhaps like scale up a certain level of quantity or quality in a pilot, or maybe quality across a larger number of farmers. If the value is not getting back to the farmer at the end of the day, then nothing is going to last past the intervention. So really what you're looking for when you're doing the design is working with those stakeholder farmers that are way upstream, at the raw material source, and then also working, downstream with your clients and ultimate off-takers. It's important to design things, to kind of grow the pie, as opposed to creating a situation where one or the other is maybe capturing more margin. I think it's not a zero-sum game, and I think if you set it up like that from the beginning, then you're not going to be able to sort of maximize the benefits that everybody is seeing. So I think that's always a really important thing to consider, is how do you drive value sort of at both ends of the supply chain, and sort of share whatever you're creating an added value across the different stakeholders. And I think if you're able to do that and able to prove that, it's easier to get everyone in the supply chain aligned. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Joe. So the message coming from Joe that one size does not fit all. I think you need to look at supply chain and figure out solutions. And I often give this example of fruits and vegetables. In all our discussion, people club fruits and vegetables as one category. And it's very, very surprising, because
Yes.
the fruits and vegetables behave so differently. Vegetables are typically short duration, short distance crops, and fruits come from all over the place. And even with fruits, mangoes and apples are so different. So I think, Joe, I'm very happy that you made this point. Excellent point. And the kind of number that you have shared on the project that you did for in Baramati in Uttar Pradesh is very interesting to me. It ties in very well with our goal of doubling farmer income. So I think we have a lot to learn from you, how to design projects, how to get the right partners on board. I think this is fantastic learning for us, and yeah, I definitely look forward to engage more and learn from you, Joe. It's great.
Yeah,
great
sure. Send me an email and you can come visit.
Sure.
When we can visit again, when that's allowed.
Sure. Thanks very much, Joe. So great thoughts coming from Joe. So that brings us to the last member on the panelist, a colleague from Cropin, Akash.
Hello.
Yeah, Akash. Great. We can see you now. Okay. So Akash, we have a very tough question for you. So the question is, we have witnessed across geographies the successful intervention of technology-driven abilities to minimize risk. How can we optimize digitization efforts to generate maximum returns? And I don't think there's anyone better than you who can answer this question. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Hemendra, for the question. And it is indeed a big, tough question. But I think Joe, in his previous comments, has done a good job to set me up really well, because he's articulated some of the punchlines that we're about to share right now. So Cropin over the last 10 years has had a fantastic run as a practitioner in the technology implementation space. It's a part of our job to travel with our clients to the source and implement these projects, work with end user groups, and bring those learnings back into the organization. And what's happened over the last 10 years is that we've amassed this collective intelligence from 62 countries. So not only do we have a range of contexts that we constantly iterate our solution based on, but also a range of use cases, because we interface with every segment in the ecosystem. whether it's the government, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's private sector enterprises, so food processors, production companies, banks and financial institutions, insurance providers, really the whole gamut. And one of the things we've discovered over the last 10 years, and Joe has done a great job alluding to this already, is that it's very important for our partners to be able to understand and decouple what are the data points that are important versus the ones that are just interesting. Oftentimes when somebody's experiencing digitization for the first time, they are tempted to collect as much data as possible and then seeing what happens, instead of really starting with an end objective in mind and then working backwards to design the data collection and the configuration. So keeping the focus and making sure that we minimize the effort on the ground that the end users have to take in data collection, and making sure that they are collecting information only on the relevant parameters is the most important. It also plays a huge role in driving adoption. And to answer the question more directly, really creates that optimal balance between the data points that you are collecting, that is the effort that you're generating, versus the value that you can extract in terms of the business insights that it can give. The other thing that we've noticed given that we work across the entire ag ecosystem, is that the same data point can oftentimes service multiple lenses. However, each player would spend time and energy in collecting that data when it might not be necessary, right? That data can also be shared. So for example, a food processing company or a food production company, it might be important for them to monitor where their farmers are located and provide them the right type of advisory and location-specific weather information, etc. If they are also interested in securing finance for their farmers, they can also share some of that information with the banks, of course, provided that the farmer is consensual to this, and this is ultimately helping the farmer. Then banks don't necessarily have to invest the same effort for sending loan officers to be able to collect information about that farmer, because that information might already exist with the food production company. So there are a lot of alternate use cases and lenses that we can service the same data set with. The same can be used for yield estimation as well as field staff monitoring. The next one to create more efficiency is to minimize the amount of field data that is collected and also rely on alternate data sets such as remote sensing and weather information. Oftentimes we can monitor a farmer in real time and have yield estimation for the grower based on just 4 to 5 data points. We would just need the location of the grower, we would need the crop that the grower is working with, and the sowing date, and if possible the polygon or the area of the plot. And just based on that much information, we can use historical weather information, we can layer geodata and remote sensing data sets to be able to estimate what is the yield of the grower and also monitor the grower in real time. And the next point is that digitization can only help in cost management. However, analytics can actually help in cost avoidance. And this is another way to generate more and more return from the one-time data collection effort or the minimal data collection effort that organizations would like to invest in. And an example for this is that once you have manual processes digitized and field teams are recording information on the crop observations, the crop stages, a lot of real-time mitigation can be accomplished, right, in terms of information to be sent to treat a particular pest or a disease attack, or some kind of proactive information to be able to change your input applications depending on what the weather changes are likely to be. But looking at years and years of data, we can actually analyze and we can inform clients on how to avoid those costs altogether. So an example of this would be, are we planting and working with farmers in the right locations in the first place? If the weather conditions have not been historically conducive, then we're not really working in the best environments to provide the right baseline or the right starting point. So it's one thing to mitigate costs in season, but there are also ways to avoid them altogether. And this can come from analytics and predictive patterns that we can start by helping growers with. So I'd say those are the 3 points for us to find the sweet spot between the right amount of effort versus maximum exponential returns from it.
Thanks, Akash, and I totally agree with you. You know, how to use the same data point, multiple use cases is so critical. The interplay between data points for cost avoidance, I think it's a great point, not just cost management. I always say agriculture is one of those areas which is, it's like heaven for data scientists, given the number of variables, given the volatility of variables. I think there's so much you can sort of model to cut costs, to improve productivity, for better monitoring, for financing, etc. So I think some very interesting points, Akash. Thanks very much. I think you answered your question really well. It was a tough question, I must say. So that's great. It brings us to the end of the panel, and we'll move to our guest speaker section today. And we're very fortunate to have 𝐤𝐭𝐻𝐭 today with us as a guest speaker. Great. So 𝐤𝐭𝐻's bio is on the slide. She's based in Nairobi, Kenya, and she comes with progressive experience in operational management in agribusiness sector. She's an advocate for food system strengthening and integrating food safety management systems in primary production for small outgrowers to large-scale farmers. With a total of 20 years of experience, our area of expertise is food safety management in agribusiness sectors in Africa and Europe, ethical trading initiatives, value chain development. So it's a great bio that we have on the screen. 𝐤𝐭𝐻, if I may request you to switch on your video, please. Welcome. And apologies for keeping you waiting, but we have kept the best for the last. So welcome to the panel, and we'll request you to answer a very specific question. Can we have the questions to 𝐤𝐭𝐻, please, on the screen? Okay, or maybe I can just ask it. 𝐤𝐭𝐻, the question for you is: food safety is a looming concern globally. Now more than ever, how can we establish a future-proof food safety program for the world through agri technologies intervention? 𝐤𝐭𝐻, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Cropin, for inviting me as the guest speaker on this particular webinar. First and foremost, good afternoon and good morning to everybody who's attending this webinar. As I've just been introduced, my name is 𝐤𝐭𝐻, and I work for the IFC Africa Food Safety Project. The project has been around now for about 4 years, and our main role is that we work with our clients across Africa to de-risk their businesses by helping them implement food safety management systems. So ICT solutions are becoming more and more important in assuring food safety. We are working with our clients, and we constantly, talk to them about adopting ICT solutions. In this particular space, there's 2 ways that we're currently doing that. Firstly, I think consumers are becoming more and more demanding, and they need more assurance as well as visibility into food systems. They want to be assured of the safety of the food that they're consuming. So it's becoming even more of a requirement, especially during COVID. People really want to feel safe, and there's no other way of making this happen but by adopting an ICT solution. Of course, I think you're all aware that COVID is not transmitted through food. However, customers and consumers still want transparency. So one way that we've seen food businesses assuring transparency is by adopting an ICT solution that provides a robust traceability platform. And by traceability, I mean a system that can track food through all stages of production, processing, and distribution. So therefore, if our client calls up and is concerned about the food that they're eating, you can be able to quickly give them the information and let them know where the product came from, where it was sourced from, and also that you're able to track the food forward, or the production forward, or the distribution forward, and you know who actually consumed or who actually bought that particular product. Secondly, I think in order to sell to the global market or into the global market and contract with international retailers, businesses must maintain international food safety certification standards, such as, I hope some of you have heard of this, Global GAP, FSSC 22000, and BRC. And every customer, every client who sells into the global market has to be audited or assessed at least once a year. Now, we have found that ICT solutions provide operational efficiency around this particular function of audit management. It basically ensures that all the data that is required during an audit is first of all really seamless and quickly available. So a lot of the data that auditors would look for are things like input applications, planting data, staff training, and production information. Now, having an ICT solution helps clients ensure that they're not sending staff into rooms with folders, looking for information, trying to find information to support their due diligence. An ICT solution makes it so much easier and so much more efficient to get all this information together and hand it over to your auditor. Now, for us, we've got a client that we've been working with at IFC who's recently actually adopted an ICT solution to just mitigate the risks associated with food safety. Now, the digital platform that they have in place simply enables them to rapidly resolve customer concerns. The products that they process, which is actually herbs, require that every time they arrive at the country at the destination, that the product is actually tested for pesticide residues. Now, if an issue is detected, they have only 4 hours to respond, explaining what has gone wrong, and what they're going to do about it, what they're going to do to basically get systems back in place. Now, if they fail to respond within 4 hours, they risk having all their products basically rejected, which for them is a huge financial loss and damage to their brand. So having this ICT solution helps them ensure that they can actually get all that information back to the consumer within 4 hours, if not faster. So I believe that for food businesses to remain sustainable, and sustainable meaning that they are viable and they continue being relevant, they really do need to implement an ICT solution, because the ICT solution will support their food safety management system, but also provide more visibility to these consumers who really want assurance that the food that they're actually eating is safe. So thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Very, very interesting thoughts. And I also believe in the post-COVID era, the need for traceability, food safety solutions will go up, and consumer awareness is going up. Consumers will demand much more accountability from the actors in the food supply chain. So I totally agree with your remarks on the potential for ICT solutions for traceability. Okay, so this brings us to end of the discussion, and we have interesting set of questions coming from the audiences. I know we are probably running behind the scheduled time, but maybe we can take 2 to 3 questions, and let me just read out the questions and ask one of the panelists to answer. So the one question which has come on smallholder farmers, it says the smallholder farmers mainly hold small patches of land, which makes it difficult for use of modern agri equipments and makes it more labor intensive. How can we use modern equipments to solve the problems of mechanization for smallholder farmers? Maybe Alan or Lucy, one of you want to take it? How does smallholder farmers afford smart equipments in small patches of land?
Hi, it's Alan here. Yeah, just to say, this is a huge problem, where I'm working in Ethiopia, and actually one thing we've been working with the government on is what we call this cluster system, and I think technology has a big enabling role here. But the basic idea is exactly to your point: the individual, plots are too small to have mechanization, whether it's planting or harvesting or whatever. But we have a program where people with contiguous land areas basically cooperate so that you have one bigger unit of production, and that's shared between the different participants. So obviously, that depends on quite a few favorable factors, like the individuals wanting to do that, the government support, and so on. But we've been doing that particularly with barley in Ethiopia, and it's actually been fairly successful, and it has enabled mechanization. Thanks.
Thanks, Ellen. And we have also seen use of harvesters and tractors in India by smallholder farmers on a rental basis. So I think farming as a service probably is one of the ways to solve for it. We'll take maybe a couple of more questions. One question is, several of smaller microfinance institutions are deeply involved with a large number of smallholder farmers through value chain financing. But due to frequent disruption in the supply chain of credit funding, we are not able to reach several farmers the way we planned. What do you suggest? Maybe Leesa, can you take this question because it is related to financing? How do we scale value chain financing to a large number of farmers? I think that's what the question is. Leesa, you want to come in, or anyone else?
Sorry, I was sorry about that. Just we're managing the muting. Yeah, I think that the digital technology that we're seeing is playing a very big role in opening up agricultural financing. But of course, this COVID situation has has really has really had a huge impact on this season. I'm sure everybody is feeling it. Certainly the role of insurance is extremely important to agricultural financing. The risks related to climate climate factors and different types of things like the desert locust that we're dealing with right now in East Africa can be covered in insurance with insurance. The digital data and the digital delivery mechanisms, mobile money, are making insurance much more relevant. So I think that definitely we're seeing the banks and financiers step in closer when there is when there is insurance in the mix. But definitely, I think another thing that I was alluding to earlier was this convergence of players is really important. Obviously, when there are buyers in place, banks are much more comfortable. But what's extremely important is that you're able to trace each farmer, and that can really only be done. Each farmer who's being linked to the buyer, who's being insured, who might have access to, improved inputs, who might have access to, soil testing or access to precision agriculture related to weather in their plot. So I think that what we're beginning to see is the beginnings of a patchwork quilt. Where digital data and different kinds of services are answering the questions that banks are asking. We've been doing a lot of work on credit scoring with a wide range of banks, with maybe 20 banks across Africa, where they're trying to put together credit scorecards which will give them enough comfort to get into lending to farmers who they've never seen and probably never will see. Also, I think bundling in savings products is important. What we're seeing is that a lot of farmers are very, very willing to save. It's always better to save your own money for inputs in the future than it is to borrow at a high interest rate. So, yeah, I think we're testing lots of different vectors to reduce risk factors. But there's no question that the convergence of these digital systems, and I really appreciated the earlier question about the other point about traceability and food safety. I think that is going to definitely be a trend, past 2020, that validates banks' confidence levels in smallholder farmers' ability to, to deliver.
Great, that's a very good answer to the question. I think we are short of time. Maybe we'll take the one last question. I'm sorry, there are many more questions, but we'll try and address it through an email. But probably one more question we can take, and the question is, how do you suggest bringing in a cold chain or even a grain bank technology in the overall supply chain of farmers' income? Joe, maybe you can take it. Joe, would you like to have a shot at it? How do farmers get access to cold chain and grain bank technology to improve the income?
You're really putting me on the spot here. I don't much work much with grains, but
Okay.
I think a lot of times it depends on the scale of which you're looking at, right? So I would probably need to ask some follow-up questions to actually really get some good advice. But I think generally the principle is, when you're doing your modeling or looking at what's possible, you got to build the case for it. So if you think cold chain is going to make a big difference, or using some type of warehouse receipt grain facility, you need to make sure it works, right? Is downstream the market there for it? Do farmers' behaviors suggest that this is something they'd be willing to look at? If you're trying to seek access to financing for cold chain, what type of value is it going to bring to the table? How difficult is it to maintain? So I think the important thing, or what I would suggest to this person to do, is really do the research, build it into a model. And if you can show that it's going to be able to, increase your revenue, past what it's going to cost, to implement the financing piece of it and the cost associated with it, then that's just what you've got to present to the banks. I think if this question is India specific, there's lots of lenders that are, it's one of the few markets, at least when I've worked in, where that sort of capital is available to like a farmer producer company, perhaps, or another type of farmer organization or company. But again, it's just make sure it makes sense financially, and make sure the numbers work, and then you can prove that you can pay it off. You should be able to get access to that type of financial product.
Great, Joe. Thanks very much. Really appreciate your answer to the question. I totally agree. I think the economics, the value chain economics, is so critical, and you need to figure that out depending on which supply chain are you operating in. Great. So I think we are done with the Q&A session. I have one slide on conclusion, which I've put together, but I think most of the points have said. But if organizers allow, I can probably go through those points myself. Can we have that slide? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of these points are already discussed by the panelists, but let me just put some closing comments and before we end the session. And it's mostly coming out of my experience. I've been working in this sector for a long time. There's no data available on farmer balance sheet, so I keep doing my calculations on how does it look, and I was doing it recently for a smallholder farmer who has a land area of 1 hectare, and I found that for most of those farmers, the weighted average cost of capital is about 18 to 20%, and where the return that he gets on it for majority of crops, particularly the field crops, is something like 10 to 12%. So there's a huge gap between the ROI and the cost of capital. I think innovations, agri-tech should drive to reduce that gap and make ROI far better than what the cost of capital for small farmer is, to improve the sustainability. And I think the role which innovations can play are, to me, they're typically playing on 3 dimensions. It could be 1 dimension or a combination of 2 or 3 dimensions, but essentially increasing income through better productivity, market access, diversification, optimization of input costs. That's so critical, and that's where the role of data, advisory, input linked credit comes. And last but not the least, de-risking farming, which is essentially improving access to institutional credit, reducing cost of capital, and improving access to insurance instruments. I think that combination is something which any innovator, any startup should always be looking at. How do you get the best combination out of it to improve farm economics and scale the model. Climate change is a huge problem. We all are seeing multiple instances of it, be it locust attack in India recently, be it storms, be it the frequency of droughts. I think it is putting us in a lot of pressure. India, for example, is among the top 3 water stressed countries, with 80% of water going into agriculture, mostly coming out of groundwater. So I think it's high time we start looking for solutions around water use efficiency. Soil nutrition, soil is not as healthy as it should be because of some wrong or suboptimal uses of fertilizers. And of course, we need to look at solutions around crop monitoring and improving crop health. On the gender issue, we all know that agriculture is becoming more and more feminine. The farmer is no longer he, the farmer is she, right? So any solution that we're developing should keep that factor in mind. I think that's so important. The conventional wisdom says farmer is he, and you end up making a solution which may not be suited for the women in the farming household. Last but not the least, I personally believe a lot of solutions which are being developed in India, in Africa, Southeast Asia. I think we are all trying to solve same problem. And I always wonder why we can't collaborate. Why can't we bring all the innovations together? Why can't we create an innovation corridor between India, Africa, and Southeast Asia in particular to solve for the problems of smallholder farmers? So I think that is a message from me, and I'm sure a lot of panelists have also spoken around these points. So with that, I would like to come to the end of the session. I'd like to thank all the speakers who have been the reason why this event has been so phenomenal. A big thanks to the audience for being patient and for the overwhelming response that we got for the event. Also a big shout out to a team at 𝐸𝐿. They've been working very hard for last few days. We have had multiple calls in putting this event together. So many thanks to Jyoti, Ashwani, Dhruv, Havesh, and everyone else who was involved from 𝐸𝐿 side. I think it's been a fantastic effort. I must compliment you in putting this together. Yes, and of course, last but not the least, we'll release a web link of the recording very soon. We'll share it with you. And until next time, thank you very much. Please take care and stay safe. Thanks very much.